Hello and welcome back to the Daily American. We do stuff in America every day, also known as American stuff. So, what we're going to be learning today is the scanner portion of the VCM suite. Last time you were here, we went over the editor version and looked at a 2020 EcoBoost Mustang calibration file. Today what we're going to go through is how to data log with the scanner, what channels that at least I have so far deemed appropriate, and how to look at this data and find out where it goes inside of the tuned file that we wish to tweak for more power than the factory gave us. Okay, so ignore this section for right now. I'll tell you what, I'll just go ahead and close all that out so it won't be a distraction. Alright, so you've connected to a vehicle and you've narrowed it down to the information that you want to get. Now this is how I did that. From my generic information, I knew I wanted engine RPM because you need to know how fast the engine's turning. You want to keep an eye on your coolant temperature because not only will that prevent you from overheating your engine, it could also be an indicator for what limiters you're running into. Yes, the engine will be reduced in power if it starts to overheat. That's part of a safety measure that most manufacturers build into their calibration files. You want to know how fast you're going. You want to know the airflow monitors for the engine, such as manifold absolute pressure. Let's see here. What kind of fuel ratio we're commanding, what kind of fuel ratio we're getting, what the status is of the fuel system. This will tell you whether or not you're in power enrichment mode, closed loop, open loop, decel. It'll give you some information right here that's pertinent and let you know why your short trim and long-term trims, or give you an idea of why they're doing exactly what they're doing. Accelerator pedal position. That's the position of the torque pedal that we mentioned last time. It's basically the pedal inside the car that you manipulate with your foot. Throttle position, that's going to be the actual throttle body on the engine, the throttle blade. This one's a curious one here, this knock octane modifier. This is one you want to keep an eye on because the knock octane modifier switches around a couple of tables or tweaks them to limit or allow a certain amount of engine load, which will manipulate spark and boost levels or airflow. And that is based upon its interpretation of what octane is being run through the car. Of course, naturally, you're going to make less power on 87 octane than you would on, say, 93 or even higher. We're not even getting into ethanol, but it will still run and operate because this little guy right here is watching out for you. Timing advance, that's how much timing is being applied. This is spark advance. 38 degrees, this must be a cruise area. Knock retard, that's how our knock sensor activity. And what will also populate here is a table that adds timing in the absence of knock at certain load points. So if you're slightly accelerating or you've got a little bit of a load on the engine but no knock is present, the computer's going to slowly start adding timing in small increments until the knock sensors bump it back down again. So you're always bumping against those knock sensors for peak efficiency. Let's see, and I guess you could consider the knock octane modifier as its long-term knock trim. Does that make sense? This will be the short term. It'll add a little bit, and then depending on how high this gets, the knock octane modifier adds a permanent change to that, and you're in a higher timing table from the get-go. The baseline moves up or down. So that's pretty cool. Catalyst temperature, you want to monitor that, not necessarily for safety precautions because who cares about that? I don't. But what this will do is alert you to certain areas of the factory calibration that are going to start limiting power depending upon how hot that piece of EPA garbage gets. Manifold charge temperature. This is a good one to tell you when your turbocharger starts to run out of breath. You start seeing like not just climbing but skyrocketing temperatures here, then that means that turbocharger is way out of efficiency range and it's just pumping extra heat at that point. Hot air does not make power. Cold air makes power. So you want to keep your boost levels within the turbocharger's acceptable efficiency range so that you don't really just skyrocket your temperatures out of control. Bigger intercoolers will make that window a little bigger. Factory intercooler is pretty like abysmal. It's made for like you can pass a car, you can accelerate to get onto the interstate and stuff like that. But as far as like a quarter mile racing, you're going to see hot temperatures. You go to a half mile top speed event, you're really going to see some high temperatures. You're going around a racetrack, oh yeah. So it's not made for race duty, made for occasional bursts, and that's it, which it's manufacturing costs is all that is. All right, intake air temperature, nah, you don't really need that, but I like to see how closely my intercooler is tracking outside temperature or under the hood temperature. And in this case, it's within 20 degrees, which for that little bitty thing is doing pretty good. Pressure ratio, another data point that will allow you to track limiters. Turbo airflow versus desired airflow. There are people out there that can derive a baseline horsepower number from how much turbo airflow they're getting. I'm not that smart, or I don't have that math in front of me, so I can't do that for you guys. But this is useful information. If you're like requesting a lot more air than the turbo can actually produce, then you'll probably see this get out of control, and then you're asking just too much. Inferred speed, this is another one. This is a calculation made by the computer based on certain turbo maps they've gone in. The math's way out of my league. But what I do know is that this will, this inferred chart right here, if this gets out of spec, it will start lowering power to try to protect the turbocharger. Trans output shaft RPM. Your transmission shift points are based on output shaft RPM, not engine RPM, and not mile per hour. So this is going to be something, if you've never looked at Ford, you're not going to know really what you're looking at for the very first time. Luckily for you, there are people that make charts that will interpret this and turn it into either mile per hour or engine RPM. I use one that goes by engine RPM, and it's pretty close. When you set it up, it's pretty close. But honestly, other than wide open throttle, from the little bit of tweaking I've done, I found that the factory skip shift parameters that they've got in there are pretty good. But there is one thing that does need to be changed, and I wonder if I mentioned that last time. This is why I need a script. The torque-based shifting, tell it to go off the map. Don't let it do its own, like trying to get clever and pick a shift point. All right, shift map. That's a good one because you want to know if it's on the base, sport, sand, drag, wet, traction control. If you're getting wonky shift points, you need to know if this is moved because you're not going to know which table to modify. It's in drive. You may not need that. And there's the current gear that it's in. You need that. You got to know what gear you're in. Otherwise, you don't know which to choose. You got 10 of those to pick from. You don't want to guess. These are all limiters and sources right here. So these will tell you what's controlling the desired air mass, what's controlling the actual throttle angle, the spark source, what's the torque source, what's the fuel commanded source, what's the max, the next maximum that it's fixing to hit, driver demand limiter source, torque air limit source, that's another one of these airflow limiters, protection source, which one is it going to next to try to protect the engine. And see, there's multiple ways of tracking this, and some of these maybe they're redundant and not necessary, but I like to think they are. Hello guys. So here's another good one. Throttle inlet pressure, actual and desired, also known as TIP desired. Um, this is a big indicator of what potential power your ECU is asking from the engine to produce. Here's another wastegate parameter. If you're tuning for wastegate, there's the canister pressure, wastegate duty cycle. These are good to monitor right here. Your lift pump pressure actual. That's a little sensor on top of the engine in the very back next to the firewall that goes out on a lot of the EcoBoost Mustangs. And what it does is it doesn't like read nothing. It gets frozen in a high pressure position so the sensor never trips a code, but it's no longer reading at the same time. And a lot of people are thinking that instance lets the fuel pressure drop to such a level that the high pressure pump can't appropriately feed the correct amount of fuel to the engine under power, and then they're running lean, and that's another source of eco boom. Those, whether it is or not, I can't say, but I know it's crucial to monitor that. Rail pressure, if you start running into like fuel flow limits or injector limits, which will probably come up at some point, this will tell you whether or not your high pressure pump is able to keep up with the high pressure. I think it asks for somewhere around 2,800. And if that starts falling like to 25, 24, 23, something like that, then you know you're running out of pump. Desired air load, same thing. You want to make sure those match or somewhere close to it. And barometric pressure. You need to know what your barometric pressure is at the car wherever you're doing data logs. That way you can find the appropriate boost level. All right, so we've got desired air load, absolute load, desired TIP, and actual TIP in a table. We've got knock, spark, the throttle blade, and torque pedal or accelerator pedal. Boost, map, and desired airflow in another one, RPM, mile per hour, wastegate duty cycle, and canister pressure for wastegate tuning. Now, 90% of all of your tuning can be done from this screen right here by watching these channels and then reading the applicable data as it happens on screen. You can set these up to display whichever ones you want to actually keep an eye on. Pardon, I'm turning on a fan. It's hot in here. So let's get into it here. So it looks like we're cruising around 50 miles an hour. And we downshift and start rolling into the throttle. Look at this throttle body. One in green. That's not the torque pedal. That's what the throttle blade is actually doing, trying to get that torque request out of the engine. You can see spark going up and down, throttle opening and closing. And they say you're not supposed to be able to feel some of this, but you can. You can feel it. We're downshifting. We should be around sixth gear. So there's our current gear. That's why that information is important. We bring the revs up and we're rolling into the throttle. Let's just hit play here. So then we get to full throttle, and then we reach what, about 22.2 pounds of boost. Now, again, this is an all stock calibration, as is from Ford. So what over here we see that we have the throttle blade and the torque pedal both at 90% or higher. So they're both wide open, and they're still there here at 22.2. Actual tip is below desired, and air load has not maxed anything or hasn't passed anything. But if we come over here, we can see that our absolute has passed desired and our actual tip has passed desired TIP. So that right there tells you why that throttle blade is closing. Go over here to throttle angle source. That is a torque request from the driver demand table. And it has achieved that and plus some. So the throttle blade is going to close to try to limit boost, limit airflow, to bring that torque back down to the requested amount. Let's see what else we're running into. Air mass arbitration is default. Spark source is our borderline table, so that's good. Torque source, driver demand. Fuel source, power demand. Torque max is popcorn. I think that's LSPI tables. Driver demand was combustion stability limit. So we've passed the parameters that trigger that. That's good. Same thing with our torque air limit sources, popcorn, full load limit. So we really don't have any limiters stopping us from going any higher other than our LSPI. So when you see popcorn, you can interpret that over here to these tables and this table here. Combustion stability limit triggers when you pass 203.2 kPa on the map, or the engine's producing this much torque right here or higher. It'll cap at 11,000 foot-pounds of torque, so there's no need to turn this off. And you can't really get away from it anyway, because the maximum in that table, if you'll look here, is only 220. We're going to pass that. If we go back to our data log, we're at 254. So there's no way that we're going to stay away from combustion stability limit. We just need to know what that does. And what it does is it triggers these tables right here in action. Now, remember the octane modifier. We are right here, and it's pretty high. It maxes out at 1, so we're at, you could say, 81%. So think of it this way: 100%, 0%, negative 100%. Does that make sense? Low is your low octane. Nominal is somewhere in between, like the most octane it's tuned for, and mid-grade. And this right here set that up for a high octane table. So if we look in nominal, it'll pull up, there it is. The maximum air load that it can request is around 2.18, and then it kind of scrambles around over here, and then by 5,500 it's down to 2.03. Let's go back to our data log. So let's get it at 5.5. That's close enough. Our desired load is 2.15. So let's take a look at our high table. See if we can bring this one back into focus too. Back into focus too. So we're 80% getting up to this table, right? And at 5.5, look at there, 2.18. 2.15. So we're not quite, we're just in between these two sections. And that's how these tables work. You're always going to be kind of floating around in here, depending on the grade of gas that you're running, the quality of fuel stored at that particular facility when you pick it up. And that's how it qualifies the fuel that you're running to get a certain power level out of it. Down around here at 3,000, they're pretty much the same, but it's only up here at the higher levels that they change to get you a higher load request. And these are the tables that you can bump this up, I believe, to give you a higher torque request, higher TIP request, higher load request, and therefore getting more power or requesting more power out of the engine, and then the engine's going to do what it can to deliver that. See if we run into any other limiters. You'll see the transmission shift torque modulation come into effect. And then, looky there, exhaust temperature enrichment. So, catalyst temperature is above 1500 degrees. Let's see. Temperature control right there. It's within a certain distance of the shutoff temperature, and that's really the cap temperature it doesn't want it to get over. Now you can turn this off, but I promise you, if you do that, you're going to eat up this catalytic converter because they get hot and they get hot quick. The maximum enrichment that it can get is a 0.68. So what does that translate into? Again, we'll take our Stoich. Multiply that by 0.68. 9.5 to 1. So that's rich. That's pig rich. If it gets up there, you're not going to be able to get any boost or rev this thing at all before it runs out of injector. And here's another thing that you need to look for, what we touched on earlier. Every single time that our desired tip and desired air load and desired torque for that matter is underneath our actual tip or load or torque delivered, you're going to see that throttle blade doing some wonky things. It's going to close, and I mean in this case it closed down to like 37%, so that's just barely pinched open. The reason in my view that is undesirable is you've got the turbocharger still over pressurizing and trying to deliver more than requested amounts of boost, but it's butting heads against the throttle blade. That creates air turbulence. That's overworking the turbocharger. That's going to be increased heat, and it's going to be increased back pressure on the exhaust side of the cylinder head. All of these are negative things for longevity, efficiency, and trust me, you can feel these things happening inside the car. So ideally what you want is a flat boost curve that's just riding underneath your desired TIP load and torque that gives the throttle blade maximum open time and limits the overworking of your turbocharger and throttle body. After looking at this, and I see that our turbocharger is a little hyperactive. And I know the reason they did this is they wanted to be able to reserve that airflow from the turbocharger, simulating snappier throttle response. Well, I would rather my car be predictable and smooth versus just the snappiest throttle possible at the expense of overworking some components. All right. So what we're looking at here is a full throttle pull after I made some changes to the tune file. We have the boost level staying pretty flat and consistent. The throttle blade is staying open through the majority of the run, and all of our absolutes, our actual TIP load and torque, are below our desired or requested. So that keeps the throttle blade open, that keeps the boost nice and flat. And trust me when I say that this makes the car act more predictable and a lot smoother. So just a couple of days ago, I made my last change to this thing, and it's never really finished. You're always going to be tweaking something. It's like, I don't quite like that shift point, so let's go in here and make that different. Which is the cool and the curse of having one of these things, because you're never through tweaking. And what we're going to be doing in our next video is we're actually going to take the car out. We're going to load up a stock file. We're going to do some pulls and some runs, and we're going to video that. And then I'm going to load up my tune that I've come up with, and we're going to compare the two back to back. Kind of scared for that, because what if mine's slower? It feels better. It feels like it should be faster, but who knows? Maybe Ford got it right the first time. Tune in again next week to the Daily American for another Daily American Garage moment. There. We'll call it square.